Hello, I'm Justin Wheeler, and welcome to Nonstop Nonprofit. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to extend a huge and sincere thanks to all of you who have seen us through what turned out to be a year of the unexpected. In 2020, the Nonstop Nonprofit podcast produced over 30 episodes, covering topics like the future of tech, virtual event strategies, and of course, COVID. Your support has kept us going, so we're not stopping now. Get ready for a whole new year of Nonstop Nonprofit. This episode of Nonstop Nonprofit is for anyone who struggled to get their board, executive leadership, and development team working on the same fundraising planet in the same budgetary galaxy. Quam Taylor, nonprofit growth expert and fundraising capacity builder, joins me for a conversation that's going to get your entire team focused on the bottom line. Yeah, that bottom line, your budget. My favorite part of these conversations with nonprofit leaders is the real-life success stories we get to hear. Today, both Sherry and I throw down several examples of nonprofits that have accomplished great things through shakeups in their teamwork and perspective. These are moves that any nonprofit can make with patience, communication, and practice. So if you're looking for a way out of that rut your nonprofit has fallen into, listen in now. This conversation is going to show you how focusing on your budget leads to greater awareness of your org's needs, teamwork that's actually productive, and investment in your nonprofit's true capacity for impact. Let's dive in. It is your number one priority to ensure that your business can continue to deliver on its mission, whether it's this year, next year, and beyond.
I'm always so baffled when I do webinars. There's always somebody at the end who raises their hand and says, I'm the development director. Should I have access to the budget? I'm always like, yes, you've got to know that.
The best thing that we can do is just raise as much money as possible and then give it to the people around the world.
If you're going to be sustainable, you have to have a multi-channel strategy to reach all of these different generations of donors however they want to be reached.
The best thing you can ever do as a nonprofit leader is spend as much money as possible on your story.
And it snowballs like any peer-to-peer campaign. The more people that view this content, the further and further it grows.
Then you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
That is unacceptable, and that is not the way to run a board.
The more nonprofits can give their donor base that experience of the impact that's being made on the ground level, there's nothing else that you have to give someone. This is Nonstop Nonprofit. Hey listeners, welcome to Nonstop Nonprofit podcast. Very exciting to have Sherry Quam Taylor join us today. And before I jump to say too much, Sherry, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Justin. Thanks for having me. I think you're my last one of 2020. I'm recording.
Last one, 2020. All right.
Hallelujah.
Well, here we go. Here we go.
Hopefully
we go out. Let's go out with a bang.
Yeah,
That's the hope.
Let's do it.
So for our listeners, Sherry, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, how you work with nonprofits.
Sure. So I'm Sherry. I'm in the Chicagoland area, although I serve nonprofits all over the country. But I joined the nonprofit sector over a decade ago. I can't believe it's been that long. But I also, like you, Justin, left my job. I was in corporate America and to join a nonprofit that I was beyond passionate about. I had volunteered, I had served on the board, and they were doing international work in India to anti-trafficking work and really working with orphan care and elevating the orphan care, the level of care, if you will. And so I always had been, I was one of those volunteers that was working like a 40-hour a week at night, in addition to my regular job. And so finally they wore me down and I entered nonprofit in 2010. And so but I found myself in a new sector where I had little connections, little network, and I wasn't short on passion or desire to want to fully fund the organization. But I quickly realized there were a lot of places we were stuck. And I realized that, there were a lot of places that I saw that other organizations were stuck, and a lot of misconceptions in the sector about how we should fully fund an organization. So it sent me on this journey to really figure out, how do we get all the funding, not just, the fun things, the program things that people want to fund, but how do we fund admin? How do we fund overhead? All those good things.
Don't say that word here.
I love that word. I love that word.
I love it. So do I.
I'll talk about that word all day long because we needed it. We needed to scale. We needed to grow. And so I think at first, and maybe it was like this for you, Justin, I felt like not being in the sector before and having a different background was a bit of a disadvantage. But looking back, I can honestly say that beginner's mindset was the biggest gift.
Okay.
Because I we pushed back against, the scariness of the percentages and the we shouldn't do this and you shouldn't be risky and you shouldn't try new things. I was trying to scale a business, right? And so, and it was successful. We tripled the revenue in 18 months. And so I realized that maybe I had kind of a unique approach, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was really crafting the methodology that I teach today. And so after a few years, I started my own business. I'm on the getting ready for the 9th year of my business. And really, I solve a very specific problem. I help nonprofit leaders who are killing it in so many areas, growing, but they still need more unrestricted cash to invest in their growth. And that usually, in my case, comes from mid and major level individuals. But they just kind of don't know how to do that because they have a background in something else. So
Totally.
That's in the gist what I do.
Okay. I love, in regards to a point you made a little bit earlier about sort of, being new to the nonprofit, which afforded you the ability to ask the tougher questions and to think through things differently. I remember this article from Harvard Business Review. They call it zero gravity thinking, where when you're trying to solve a hard problem, sometimes the best way to solve it is to bring people that have zero context to the problem because they're going to think more creatively. They're going to think, they're not going to think with limitations. And I think this is a massive problem in the nonprofit community today, especially around overhead. We think about overhead as this really negative connotation, and it's forced nonprofits to, basically live on pennies on the dollar to run the business, which is not going to promote growth, which is not going to promote, deeper impact. And it's definitely not going to accelerate the overall outcome that the organization is trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And I would say the number one thing I see that's keeping organizations from growing is feeling like we have to abide by those misconceptions and then working the puzzle to try to figure out how to fund, against all these rules. And it's why organizations funding plateaus so often. And so break free from it. Enter 2021, pushing that aside is my message. And 2020 has never proved this more.
Yeah.
Most people who have come to me this year, it's because their funding model has been either tied to this or, they were kind of too dependent on one thing. They were too dependent on government funds, too dependent on events or foundations, when what everybody needed this year was cash.
Yeah.
So we could invest it as flexibly as we could. And that's individual donors. So
absolutely.
It's exciting. It's been an exciting year to wrap up, even though I know it's been very difficult for many. It's really highlighted or kind of made me even more passionate about this. We've got to fund all aspects of the organization.
Yeah, I think 2020 has been a year that has forced nonprofits to diversify their revenue streams, and to take a look at their own business model to understand is this sustainable? Is this going to work? And I think this is something that I love about. I know this is what I love about your consulting business is the way you get executives and boards to really think about the business. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your methodology and what sort of what you would say your core competencies are through the consulting business that you operate and run?
Yeah. So I would say first and that objectivity that you were mentioning is a huge part of what I do. First, let's make sure we're actually creating a true financing plan so we can fully fund your organization. Let's not, we'll be over here and squeak by. We'd love to do it. We hope to do it. What do you need? Let's put together a real financing plan. That starts with budget. We're going to talk about budget, but we can't create a real fundraising plan or how we're going to finance the organization if we don't know our actual need. And then the key is I
thought though that it's supposed to work where you fundraise and then you just do whatever you can with those funds. So, you don't have a real strategy going into the year. It's just whatever you raise, those are the programs that you're going to be able to fund. That's not the work?
No, I don't like that. You can sign up for my program. No, I'm kidding. So then when we have that financing plan in place, then I want to talk about hours and time, because they're the hours and time and money, because the number one thing I hear from fundraisers is I don't have enough time. I can't do it all. I got events, I got, foundations, I got appeals, I got Giving Tuesday. We have to make sure as you're trying to grow that you're aligning the limited hours you do have for your board, your executive leadership and development directors. We have to make sure that you are spending I'm doing my pyramid. We're spending enough time on the size gifts that actually are going to yield the most money. I'm not saying ignore, campaigns and online gifts, not at all. But you also need to have a plan to move into larger gifts.
Yeah.
If you don't, you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah. So how do you get an organization to move in that direction, or what's the process that helps an organization maybe that's traditionally dependent on campaign fundraising or low dollar fundraising? What sort of approach do you take to help organizations kind of navigate that journey?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is, and it always surprises people. Can we just jump in and talk budget here? I was on another podcast recently, and I said, "Can I talk budget?" And he said, "Well, you just lost half my audience, but I guess you can." I'm like, that half that stays on, they're going to raise more money this year or next year, I should say. Where I start, Justin, is looking at I hop on the 990, but I also look at, are you investing enough? Are you planning to invest enough in all three areas of your organization? And that's why you have to start with budget. I'm going to tell you 99%, I might even say 100% of people who come to me are not reaching their goals, not raising more every year because of how they're approaching their budgeting. And it's based on, well, let's see what we have, what contracts we have committed. Let's see what we have pledged. And so it's their development strategy and plan is already rooted in, well, I hope we can do it, and then that tone to a donor is, well, we'd love to do this, as opposed to, I'm so excited to share with you our need this year. We have a $3.2 million need. Can I share with you what that looks like? Like which, a major donor, which conversation are they going to be attracted to? The hope we can do it, or I got a plan. I can't wait to share it with you. So if you got to start with the numbers, you got to go to the numbers. And this is where, it's key for the board to also understand and always understand that the expense is a huge part of that. And they have to have a comfort level with investing, spending money to make money. It's my motto. I didn't invent it, of course, but it's true. You have to spend money to make money and then put more money into programs. So I start with the numbers every single time.
Yeah. So when an organization is thinking about budgeting, what line items would you recommend for an organization that's looking to increase major gift fundraising? Is it headcount? Is it technology? What is it that you help individuals kind of make that sort of?
Yeah, technology is a huge one, right? Like, are you using your CRM, or do you have the tools in place that can help you make more money?
Yeah.
I would say it's a big one I see is headcount. It's like, that's going to throw off our percentages.
Yeah.
But if it helps you put more gas in the engine for 18 months, and if you can look ahead 24 months and see that you'll be bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars more, was it worth it?
Yeah.
It was. I always try to look at it from a standpoint of, what do we need to stop doing so that we can start doing other things that generate more revenue? And so sometimes it is like, why are you guys doing that? It may have worked for you from year 1 to year 4 of your organization, but it's not the strategy that's going to take you to the next level.
Right.
And so, it is. If you don't know how to do major gift fundraising or write campaigns and appeals, you need to invest in learning how to do that. You need to invest in equipping your board, to help them see the role that they can play in that too.
Yeah. And I think boards have, I sit on a board. And so, I think about this even from my own experience. I think boards have this like unrealistic time frame. We look at nonprofits and their budgets, their impact, we look at on a 12-month basis. And when you think about, high growth, when you think about high impact, it's never done in 12 months. It's never, it's never reached. And so, I think like when we think about like strategic planning at the board level, and we think about strategic budgeting at the board level, the mindset needs to be, not just what is our percentage in year 1, what does it look like in year 2 and year 3 and year 4. And I think there's, I think the reason why this is important is I look at nonprofits in three different sort of categories,
Yeah.
right? And the startup nonprofit is, of course, going to need to invest way more money in overhead. And if they aren't, I mean, I've met lots of organizations that are trying to do this 100% model or not get paid in the startup phase. And that's a recipe for disaster, a recipe for bankrupting the nonprofit before it even has any impact. So I think that I also need to change sort of just this framework at the board level to help organizations, help board members really understand this is more of a long-term play, not a 12-month play.
That's really good to add that to the conversation. I have this graphic I show oftentimes when I do a lot of board trainings. I think I've done the most board trainings in 2020, which is kind of good, I guess.
Yeah.
Virtual board trainings are easier to do. I have this graphic I show of one of my clients it's probably an 8-year span, but it's showing how the first 4 years are kind of like, well, they're kind of there, right? But it's 92% program, 90% program, 91% program. And then to show what happened when we shifted that to 75% program and more in admin and fundraising. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Revenue started increasing. And what happened even further on. So like to show them what that can be over a span of 5 to 10 years is huge and speaks volumes. And it's super important to the board member who says, we can't do that. We want as much money to go in programs. Well, over here on our growth, we're actually putting double back into programs, even though the percentage is less.
Yeah.
So that doesn't add up. So I love, you're so right. I want them to be understanding the annual giving rhythm, but they got to be looking out further and longer.
Totally. And, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, just kind of my dislike towards the 100% model. And there is a backstory there. So, when I was at Liberty in North Korea, I pushed our organization to actually embrace this 100% model. And when we did grow. We grew significantly, but not because we embraced the 100% model, because we were spending 30 to 40% on overhead. Right. We were hiring the right people. And, the way it was being marketed to the outside was, even though we had funders for overhead and there was a different bank account and different fund, so 100% private donations were going to programs. If you put the overall fundraising dollars together, it was still 30 to 40% of total revenue. Yeah. And so you create this real disadvantage and you perpetuate this problem in the nonprofit community. The less you spend on overhead, the better it is. When in reality is the more you spend on overhead, and of course there's a threshold, but the more you spend on overhead, the more impact you will make. Yeah. And we need that. I don't know why it just seems so obvious to me now, but for some reason it's still
it's huge.
Yeah.
I always say, as a fundraiser, you almost have to be an educator to many donors. I mean, of course, there's savvy donors who get that. I had a client recently that this year is A, the most money she's ever raised, B, the most money she's ever put back into programs, but C, her program percentage is the lowest it's been. And so she was sharing, this with a donor, and the donor literally said, "Come back to me when you get that turned around. I'm not going to fund that." And I was like, ugh. It just, we have to educate. We have to educate continually. And so I understand the desire of the 100% model, but gosh, I just feel the pressure to educate, especially coming out of 2020, that wasn't enough. The do more on less model, we got to leave it in 2020. It is not what, my gosh, we even, I would look at it as, don't we owe that to the people who have been on the front lines and have served our community so greatly, that we owe that to them to understand that that's not how they can grow their business and mission.
Yeah, totally. And this is the last thing I'll say on this topic, and we'll move on. But it reminded me of a story when I was fundraising with a major donor. They asked that question, like how much of fundraising dollars goes to overhead, and I was like 32%. And he's just like, oh, that's tough. Like I don't know if I can make a conscious gift because of that. Just seems really high. And I was like, well, how much? And he was a business owner. I was like, how much what is your overhead at your business? I would imagine it's probably 70 to 75%. You're high growth, you're growing, you're living on that 30% margin, you're super profitable. What happens if you scale back that 70%? What if you start reinvesting just 20% of your income back into the overhead? What would happen? And the donor had an aha moment. He understood, oh, okay,
Good.
yeah, that actually is. And so I like to tell fundraisers, when you get asked that question, return it back to the donor,
Right.
whether or not they're a business owner or not, because I think it stops you in your tracks, because
Right.
it's a very fair comparison in my perspective. But anyways,
Totally.
we'll move on, because I want to talk about the friction that we often meet with executive directors and board members. And so, in your experience, talk to me about that. Do you see friction at the board level and executive director level as it relates to fundraising? Is this a problem that you're trying to solve, or what does it look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I don't have a lot of people coming to me saying, "Oh, our board loves fundraising, and I can't stop them." Maybe no one has ever come to me and said that. I think it's I mean, yes, there's friction. To me, my strategy is, let's demystify what this actually is. Like, what is really the thing that's holding them back? Because they're volunteer, so they already have limited time. Like, so the other thing to remember is like with many people in the sector, we have degrees in something else. We are subject matter experts at our mission or our programs. Same with your board members. They're experts at something else. They probably have limited understanding on what a donor experience even looks like, or what is the process of asking for a major level gift. And so I think when we remember that they're an expert at something else in fundraising, it's easier for us to be like, well, that's why everybody says, just don't make me ask for money. I'll do anything but the ask. Or it's like just complete fear.
Yeah.
So like I really, really try to break down the us and them barrier and help them see that we all have to be supported through the process, because typically the entire team, board, ED, and sometimes DD, are learning how to fundraise too, because they were in another role and kind of found themselves in this.
Totally.
So I think it's important to check ourselves on that first.
And I think that's why it's also so important to ensure your board members are truly brand ambassadors for the organization. I think one of the best ways to create that is for them to have the real life experience of what you're actually doing.
Right.
At Liberty North Korea, we take our board every other year to our programs in South Korea and Southeast Asia, where they actually experience firsthand what we're trying to do, what the challenges are, meet with individuals that have been supported by the organization. And what we have seen that has actually turned our board is a fundraising machine. There's competitions and board meetings. There's friendly banter about who's going to raise more money at the, who's going to bring guests to the galas that's going to raise the most money. And that wasn't always the case. And it started to turn and pivot when we started taking the board to the programs. And so I think this is something that I would also recommend, is where, when possible, to have these vision trips so that you get the buy-in from your board members. And I think that, you see, I talked about this actually a little bit yesterday, when you start to actually visually see the problems you're solving, you have these mirror neurons in your brain that start to trigger more empathy. And the more empathetic you are, that ask becomes a lot less of a challenge. And you actually, you're starting to look at it more as an invitation. You're offering somebody the ability to feel and experience what you experienced when you were a part of that impact.
Yeah. I am doing what I'm doing because I went over and saw, a mission in action. And, my whole life changed because of my whole career trajectory. My children are adopted from India. Like, everything changed. So like that one-on-one, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, that's good.
Couldn't agree more.
So you get a lot of executive directors, I imagine, reaching out to you and saying, Sherry, how do I increase revenue? How do I raise more money? Where do you start?
So here's where I start. There's 3 places where I usually find that organizations' funding has plateaued and they're a bit stuck. I had someone just the other day say to me, it's a national medical organization you would know. They're like, we're really good at raising $4 million every year. Like, we're solid, like we're consistent, right? So there's 3 places I always look. One, we've already talked about 2 of them. One being overhead. You've got to be spending more money to make money. So they specifically had a staffing issue. Second one is budget. We've talked a little bit about too. Are you actually budgeting to your need? Therefore, your fundraising plan sticks to that, or it reflects that, I should say. I always tell boards, I'll just as an aside, 50% of your role and your fiduciary responsibility is expense. The other 50% is the top half of that, the profit. How are we balancing it? We can't just say, looks good, budget approved, let me know how it goes. How are you going to help balance that? Like apparently competitions, with boards that you're on. But so it's 50-50. Like you can't just approve the expense side without saying, I, as a board member, am committing to help, really finance the organization and balance the budget, including reserve, including cash balance. And that's never been more important. As an aside, I probably would have said before 2020, gosh, you at least need to have 4 months reserve. And now I'm up on the 9 and 12 month mindset.
Yeah.
That's what people needed this year, right?
How do you I wanted to ask about that. So, because this is definitely I think a hot topic, when donors, look at whether it's a P&L or look at 990 and they see, assets and they're like, whoa, why is this organization sitting on $1 million or $2 million? How do you help one organization walk through the importance of this? Or I even have seen board members, be opposed to having such large reserves, which 9 to 10 months does not seem like such a large reserve. So how do you have that conversation, and how do you equip people to get in line on this?
I think it's coming back to what you said of that. Really, you had that investment level conversation with a donor. Usually when you're talking to I work with mid and major level donors, but like we are having that investment level conversation. It is typically with somebody else who's running a business, has cash in the bank. And so my coaching is all about how do you talk that CEO dialect and really almost treat a donor as a stakeholder in understanding why you need that. Why do we need to have that? Well, because if we wouldn't have had that going into 2020, we would have shut down 2 sites, or we would have had to lay off the staff. Or you got to lean into these conversations that for years people have avoided. And we've felt like we can't talk about reserve. We can't talk about overhead. The donor won't fund me. I'm going to call anybody's bluff on that, because move into that openness and transparent, I call it like peer-to-peer business person, people growing businesses conversation. I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, that donor will appreciate it and think, gosh, I don't hear this from my other nonprofits I'm supporting. Like this person's really running a well-oiled business.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Bring up that elephant in the room, share with them why you have it. You have a good reason.
Yeah. Do you prescribe like a percentage of revenue to be set aside to build that? Is it different donors that are funding sort of the reserve? How do you go about on the budgeting process of that?
You know what? I'm a believer in starting from an all-in number. If we've kind of, I just round numbers, if you've kind of like always hit 1.9 every year and you are struggling to pay, to do a payroll, every year, or at your last month of every year, I would say let's do an all-in budget. Let's look at that. So it's 1.9. Well, we probably should really be raising to 2.3. Okay. And then we're going to try to, over the next 24 months, build a 9-month reserve. I will split that and put that right in the budget and say, we have a 3.6 or whatever it is, $2.6 million need this year, and share with them why you're doing that.
Yeah.
Walk through, really nicely designed financials. That just makes sense. You're scaling a business.
And this is something that a lot of nonprofit don't think about, but having that reserve is actually advantageous, especially when raising with foundations. No one wants to fund an organization going out of business in 3 months. No. And when a foundation analyzes the finances and sees, this organization is healthy, it has reserves, it knows how to fundraise, it's going to make you a much more attractive organization to raise bigger dollars from foundations. And so I think agree. That's another sort of strength of the reserve is for institutional giving. It's not frowned upon. It's actually it's an advantage for you.
You have to have, though, your individual giving program tight to do that, though. It's got to be unrestricted gifts. And so that's, again, where people have struggled when, they have a $5 million budget and 4.7 of it is coming in from government or foundations where, I have a group I'm working with and they have cash in the bank. It's all restricted. So they struggle every month. So it's important.
At one point, we were 70% funded by one foundation. Wow. And it was a 7-figure gift that the foundation was giving year over year. And we went back for our repitch, another 2-year sort of commitment. And the foundation said, hey, listen, we're happy to renew and we're going to renew for 1 year as long as in year 2, our gift at the same size is only 40% of your budget. So we essentially had to go to work and build an individual donor program to ensure that we were getting the same level of funding.
Yeah.
And I remember walking out of the meeting, I was so pissed off because it's like, yeah, how are we gonna essentially find a couple $1 million in 1 year? It seemed at the time like a impossible task.
Right.
But I look back, it was one of the greatest things that ever happened because it was the start of our individual donor program, which I then learned how important that was to, again, to foundations and institutional giving.
That's good.
So in regards to going back to sort of like this tension that we face at the board level, and I've even experienced it with CEOs and executive directors at nonprofits who have felt that fundraising isn't a part of their job title, and their job title's, that's somewhat beneath them, which is always surprising when I hear that. How do you coach boards and executive directors that no, this is very much a part of your job description? This is perhaps one of the most important things you can be doing at this level.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's the most important thing, and even if you have a development staff, right? Like, and I think because then it almost creates another friction of the development staff wanting the ED and the board to help, and then it's like, well, here's the budget, go raise it, right? And so my coaching, even if whether they have development staff or not, specifically if they have it amazes me how so often the development staff is actually not involved in the upfront planning and really understands what the need is.
They're just given the number. Yeah.
Here's the number, right? How would you go have an investment level conversation with that guy we're talking about if you don't know why you need to move from 5.7 to 6.2? How would you even be able to have that conversation? So what that turns into then is, well, fund this project and fund this project. And then you're never fully funded because you aren't funding to the overall number. And so to me, it's a total co-pilot scenario, or whatever that would be called, with three pilots of the development team, the executive director, and the board from the very get-go on really understanding what is the need, and then how are we all buying in and putting together the financing plan that actually leads to us hitting that number.
Totally. That's good.
And so it has to start from the very beginning. And I'm always so baffled when I do webinars. There's always somebody at the end who raises their hand and says, "I'm the development director. Should I have access to the budget?" I'm always like, wow, like, yes, like, you've got to know that, or
you should be creating the budget.
You should be craving. But I see that really holds people back. And so sometimes that's a little like, oh, really? They need access to that? So sometimes you do have to start way back at the beginning to make sure everybody understands how that fits in.
Totally. So I'm a sucker for turnaround stories. I love turnaround stories, and following you on LinkedIn, I know you have a lot of turnaround stories. I'd love if you could share an example or two of one of those stories that you came in and you saw the opportunity, but there was a lot of work to be done to kind of turn the organization around to become a fundraising machine. Anything that comes to mind that you can share and sort of what the process was from start to finish?
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday, I was talking to a client of mine that I've had the privilege, they're actually here in Chicago, helping high-performing Black youth be on a college path, right, and through college, and just really what a year for them, doing remarkable work. But I've been working with them since, I think, probably April. And what's interesting is they're a historic organization, and a new leader came into play a couple of years ago. And what's actually interesting is he actually went through the program as a youth and is very successful. He's a lawyer. He's running the organization. But, kind of like what we're talking about, in the past, a lot of the giving had been very transactional, we do an application, we get the funding. We go do a sponsorship, we get the funding. He also, having that fresh set of eyes and that outsider point of view was kind of like, this seems like we should be doing something different, right? So in essence, I've been working with them to really understand, what does it first look like for them to fully fund this amazing vision he has, to really like drastically increase the number of students they're serving. Like, is that doable? And it is, because it takes an outsider sometimes for them to see where the money is sitting on the table that they aren't getting. And so we've really been on this journey of, how do we not only create a real financing plan, but then how do we pivot what the staff has been doing from way more of those transactional activities, I'm going to say board two, to really making sure that we're building deep relationships with people so that we can actually have a chance at getting their best gift.
Yeah.
Because if we aren't going deeper and serving our donors in that way and really creating great donor experiences that are customized to them or customized to that segment, we're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And so, of course, in this year, thankfully, a lot of people are coming to them and saying, okay, we want to help. But just yesterday, I was talking to the senior development director, and she brought up a spreadsheet showing the board's giving last year and the board's giving this year. And I was like, hold on a second. What is this? What is? It's quadrupled.
Wow.
So their personal giving has quadrupled because they've grabbed onto this. Oh, so it's not just me calling my buddy and, at this big bank over here and getting money, but it's actually me leading my network through a great donor experience and then actually getting to the point where we are soliciting their gift. So this board is, they're on fire and they're leaders, here in Chicago. So their own giving has quadrupled. And then I don't even have the number, Justin, of their businesses, their connections, their colleagues. It's multi six figures, all because they learned how to ask for what they need and then how to tie that to what the donor valued or what they needed.
Okay, but yeah.
And then they asked.
Yep.
They asked, which doesn't happen all the time. And so I'm cheering them on. They're doing awesome work. They have 100% graduation rate from college for all their students.
That's awesome.
They're going to like Harvard and crazy places. So it's been probably one of the most rewarding clients I've worked with this year. And their numbers are showing it, which is great.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. That's a phenomenal turnaround. And a couple things you said stuck out to me and in regards to, knowing what to ask for. Right. And this goes back to your strong belief in the budgeting side when that transparency is shared with the board, and the board helps obviously define that with the, every sort of fundraising position at the organization. You're not just going to ask for $100,000. You're asking $100,000 for X, Y, and Z, and you know what it is. You can articulate it, and that makes all the difference. Another thing you said was, in regards to where a lot of money is being left on the table is in this transactional fundraising approach. Help us understand, what are some common transactional fundraising approaches that you see that you try to turn around and try to eliminate from organization fundraising habits?
A big one would be corporate sponsorships for events. And so to me, so much money is left on the table. And this could be said for individual gifts as well.
Yeah. When
we decide as the fundraiser or the board member what size gift somebody else should give or can give, right? So in the past, this has looked like, let's just ask them for silver sponsorship because I don't know if they would do gold, right? Like it's when they're actually over here writing unrestricted gifts for 3 times the size, but we're like limiting it because that's what our event sponsorship packages are. So much money. And I'll tell you, I asked everybody before about mid-February this year, if that event goes away, are those donors still going to give to you? And it was totally hypothetical.
Yeah.
And we're feeling that.
Yeah.
So to me, Justin, the money left on the table is when we decide ahead of time. Now this year, that looks like, I know that donor gave, $50,000 last year, but I don't know how their business is doing. So let's just ask them for 25. And so as a fundraiser, as a board member, I don't know any major donors. Why are you deciding if your network, can give or not? You have to really look what's behind that, because your job is to commit to sharing the need of the organization. And if you're not doing that, it's typically a symptom of maybe you're like uncomfortable, you're not doing it right, and so you're avoiding it, which leaves money on the table. A lot of times we're doing that because we don't have a pipeline of donors. And so, oh my gosh, we got to get this gift. Don't take them off. Let's just ask for 10 because we're struggling and this is a slow month for us. And so then we undersell the ask. Or there's just a complete uncomfortableness of that ask. And the sad part of that is you're underselling your mission for far less than its impact, when maybe that donor wanted to give a bigger gift to you and you just totally undersold it. And gosh, if there's ever a year we shouldn't be doing that, it's this year, right?
Yeah.
So Like, don't make decisions. Don't go into the meeting going, they can't do this. That to me, that the most money is left on the table when that happens with businesses,
Totally.
even foundations to some extent.
Mm.
Just share the need. This is back to the budget. You got to know the need and share the need.
Yeah.
And let them decide. Guide them to their best gift.
Yeah. I love that because, I think giving is so irrational, right? I mean, it's not like if you really like sit down and just think about generosity, it's such a crazy concept that, people who work so hard are willing to, and whether it's $5 or $500,000, they're willing to part for it because they want to help something else, somebody else. And I go back to this idea of giving being irrational and how that's actually a really good thing for fundraising, because if someone cares, if someone is compelled to do something, they will be irrational in how they actually give, right? And this translates to the dollars. And I think that's just why it's important when you're going to ask, from a major donor or foundation, whatever it might be, why it's one, understand what is this person's capacity in the first place, right? Like, because you don't want to ask something that's outrageous,
of course,
right? That's gonna I can't even make that gift. You don't know me, whatever. But I generally like to the principle I like to go by when raising is 2x what I thought at first I should ask for. Go bigger, and it's okay if the donor comes back and says, "Hey, I want to do this." But oftentimes I found where we're leaving money on the table is even as fundraisers, we often under ask for the amount the donor could give if they were a little bit more inspired, if they were a little bit more bought in or understood, the overall vision where the organization was trying to go.
You're so right. I have a one time a young couple, say young, I don't know, they're in the upper 20s. They emptied out their 401k.
Wow.
So they both had nice jobs, but they were like, you know what? We have 30 years to make it back, and we feel led to do this. And they emptied it out, and it was a 6-figure gift. Never, ever would we have asked for that, right? But if we would have said, oh, well, would you give 10,000? That would have been leaving money on the table. And so it's but you know what we did? We shared the need. So I never underestimate or never make the decision, for the donor.
Yeah, totally. So as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say, as you go through the process with your clients, what's the ideal working relationship between a fundraising team, right? Let's say maybe a mid-sized organization who has, who the fundraising team is maybe different than the executive director. What's the best way this team can leverage the ED and the board for ultimate success? What would you recommend for fundraising teams in this regards?
Yeah, a lot of times when fundraising teams come to me and it's I can't get the ED to fundraise, or I can't get the board, it's an us and them scenario. Sometimes my biggest advice, and it seems a little people are wait, what are you talking about? Is we have to show them how it's done. We have to remove the mystery from the process so that it's not this strong arm. It's my advice oftentimes to the development team is create a great donor experience for each one of the board members. Serve them, lead them to a solicitation, show them that scary ask is only one step in the process. Show them all the different ways that they can actually be a supporting cast member. And oftentimes when that happens, they're like, you're pretty good at that. That was actually nicely done. And then they start feeling comfortable. Maybe I can introduce my colleague to you, or maybe I should introduce you to my neighbor. So I'm a big believer in the fundraising team has to model what they want the board and ED to do as a first step sometimes, even though we just want them to know. We just want, you got to show them how to do that. And especially when, I want the board focused on those top level gifts. So if they are going to give me 1 or 2 hours, between board meetings during the month, you got to lead them and show them what you want them to do, because I want them yielding, 5-6 figure gifts versus, getting auction items for the event. Right. So it's a whole managing up approach that I tell people to do.
Yeah, that's great. And I laugh because I have so much to say about auctions, but that's a whole different podcast for another time. Yeah. That is great. And I think the other thing I'd add there is I think in those types of scenarios, and even just in general, fundraising is a muscle, right? It's you have to train it. You have to exercise, you have to work it out. It's the only way you're going to be comfortable fundraising, because it is not comfortable asking someone for money. It's no matter how good somebody is at it, right? It's because they've developed and honed that skill over time. Right. And so understanding when there is this friction or this discomfort, it's because it's something, you said this earlier, that just hasn't been done in the past. And so it's a new skill. It's a new sort of thing to learn. And I think going in with that understanding, I love that is your approach. So for our listeners who are like, Sherry, I need more revenue, I need more money, I need to raise more in 2021 and beyond, how can they get in touch with you? How can they find you to talk?
Thanks, Justin. Well, first, LinkedIn. I'm on there every day, so go find me on LinkedIn, and then you can hop on my website, which is quamtaylor.com. My two last names mushed together, and you can find me there.
Awesome. And for those of you listening, we'll also link to her website directly below the podcast. So you'll have the link there as well. Sherry, thank you so much for spending time with us on the podcast, talking about fundraising, major gift fundraising, how to get boards and EDs more involved. Truly appreciate your time with us today.
I appreciate you having me.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. This podcast is brought to you by your friends at Funraise, nonprofit fundraising software built by nonprofit people. If you'd like to continue the conversation, find me on LinkedIn or text me at 562-242-8160. And don't forget to get your next episode the second it hits the internets. Go to nonstopnonprofitpodcast.com and sign up for email notifications today. See you next time.